So if you stay pretty much where you are, we will move on to the next segment. I'm delighted that Dr. Viola, who is Director General of Connect and of course needs no introduction, has been able to find time to join this conversation. Can please people close the door at the back? Over there at the end? Close the door. So we had at various points during the day today short mentions of AI and what's happening. You have been personally very involved in negotiating the AI Act, and much of the conversations we'll have now for the next 20 minutes will be around that space. Do you think, of course, you hope it will work, but where do you think the difficulties are going to be lying? Some governments are clearly difficult about it. We've seen Germany yesterday throwing its weight possibly behind it, but is the act still possibly in danger? What's your current view?
Thanks very much. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for inviting the other side of the world to this conference. Before we go into how the food looks and tastes, about this question about the path to the approval of the AI Act. I am optimistic. Of course, still we have to respect the democratic process, so the orientation of the member states on Friday, the vote in the committees, the final vote in plenary, the vote on council. So there's still a couple of months to go. It's a complex test, so it has been finalized with all the first part in the last 2 weeks, so it's normal that capitals take their time to read it. I think it's also good that capitals also ask, and what about innovation? And what about investments? It's good. It's exactly the balance we need. So for all these reasons, I'm very optimistic about the next steps. And I think, yes, Europe will have an AI Act at the end of this process.
You also established an AI office, yeah, which is just newly created, and clearly a key part of implementing the Act will fall to that office, and that will be established inside DG Connect. You will be leading that office. You'll also be the DSA enforcers and the lead in the DMA task force. How will this work together? What are the commonality and what do you see as the relationships between these tools?
Yeah, maybe I answer this replying to the second part of your question, will it work? Because they are, of course, very much linked, the two things. Of course, I'm totally biased, and you kind of anticipated I would say yes. Enforcing the AI Act and a little bit DSA and DMA, it's also managing the expectations. I mean, you take 20 plus years of no rules on the web, then suddenly you don't expect that thing immediately works. You take something that every government in the world, everyone is speaking about, and then you think the next day, wow, magically you deliver a thing that can look at the algorithms and understand whatever outcome and make companies accountable for it. So managing expectation is very much a big part of the role of a regulator. So if we all realize this is a path, and this is a dynamic path, because what is good about the AI Act, which will be reflected in the AI Office, is nothing is fixed. I mean, definitions can evolve. The thresholds for, having an analysis at algorithms that are complex and then create a systemic risk can be adapted. The risk, the number of systemic risk or product risk can be modified. And it all works with the idea stakeholders, regulators, scientific community will work together. So it's dynamic regulation. So I think, in a way, it's designed not to go wrong, because if something goes wrong, it can be corrected. Of course, it needs time to deploy. And then it comes to the point how to design the enforcers, the AI Act. I think the very interesting point that I don't know how much you actually noted that there's only one regulator in Europe, which is the AI Office when it comes to very large algorithms. This is a design from the outset. So you take DSA, DMA, which are problem fixers. They came, as I said, after 20 years of seeing that sometimes social media outcomes are not really socially acceptable. And then it came DSA, and the same for market outcomes, DMA. Here, from the very beginning, we start a European journey. It is totally new, because you don't, as a company, you will not face hundreds of regulators. You will face one regulator, very attentive, but one regulator. Of course, that will work with an ecosystem made of many national interested agencies, as I said, academia, but it's one. And that makes an enormous difference in terms of the whole dynamic. And I think it's the right scale, because when you take extremely large algorithm, I mean, the scale of it, the intensity of human capital, technical capital that you need to realize, and the scale of the market is clearly, as a minimum, European. So how it will work that is completely integrated in a DG which has the full spectrum, because we look at quantum physics, we look at supercomputers, but also at regulation. So it will have many experts in AI. We do have many, but we will get to 100 real top-level experts. Difficult to actually attract them with the salary of the commission, but I will say you work on the right side of the force. That's the motivation. So I'm hoping also to get many young PhDs in AI that will join in. So we will have a specialized AI office, which will work hand in hand, because it will be next door to the people working in DMA and DSA. And that really, I mean, also we insisted very much during the negotiation to have the AI office inside DG Connected European Commission, because those kind of experts are a scarce resource. So by having co-located this regulatory function, you can actually flexibly move people according to the size and the type of problems, and also work cross-sector.
But what will be the division of labor between the central function? You know, you'll inevitably deal with the largest AI companies and the national governments that presumably remain involved in dealing with smaller AI operators or implementers, productizing the work.
Well, the division is system level, European Commission, product level, member states. Let's make an example. Let's take a pacemaker, which is fueled in terms of the brain of pacemaker by a generative AI algorithm, by a foundation model. I mean, the model might have a problem, the model as such, and that's the responsibility of the Commission, because this model is applied in many different areas, so if the problem appears, it's systemic. Then, to get the famous CE marking on that pacemaker, it's a product issue. So you go to a conformity assessment body that will actually do the conformity assessment for that particular product. AI will be a bit everywhere. As you might remember, the AI Act does not regulate all AI. It regulates only those cases which have an high risk for the health of a person or the life of a person, or social risk, which are hopefully a minority. In that case, the conformity body of a member state that the company chooses where to have the CE market will come into play. Sometimes it's self-assessment, and this is a product level. When the problem is more systemic, then this is a system-level problem, and then it's the Commission. That's the division of labor.
But the focus is going to be on levels of risk. Where does the market power question fit in all of this? And you heard, I'm saying this because you heard Lina just before you, the initiative that the FTC has launched is intended specifically to look at partnership, but the foundation for that initiative is the concern that you have a number of market power actors that are extending that power into AI because they own critical infrastructure, critical inputs. Where does that issue get looked at, and when?
Well, the AI Act is an act about the risks of artificial intelligence, not about market power, strictly about market power. So the Commission, in terms of this accumulation of power around AI, especially large algorithms, has an array of tools, the most important one being competition law. And then looking at the problem a little bit more ex ante, you have, let's say, three tools. The DMA, because of course there are very, very close relationship between AI algorithm and DMA regulated products and services. I mean, take a voice assistant, take a search engine, take cloud, and whatever. You immediately understand that AI can come in scope of DMA quite quickly. Same for DSA. So we are more in a kind of societal risk. I mean, if a search engine, which is in scope of DNA, is fueled by AI, clearly is in scope. The AI Act works on the idea that it is starting to trigger the attention of the AI office when you are above a certain degree of complexity. And the complexity for the time being is fixed at 10 to the 25 floating point operations per second, which today there are only two models that pass this threshold. This, and as you know, the executive order of the United States is 10 to 26. So, of course, if you look at the models that pass this threshold, you immediately associate with companies that have a lot of market power. So indirectly, also, market power comes into the back door of the AI Act, but through the fact that so far, these very large algorithms have been produced by very large companies. But as such, the AI Act does not look directly to market power.
So you mentioned the sense in which many of the issues, some of the issues might or will fall under this sort of the domain of the DMA. Doesn't that require designation of AI under the DMA rules before it can be looked at or dealt with by DMA?
Yeah. Good question. I have my team watching me and also
I know.
colleagues of
They're speaking next.
Look, if it works like a duck and quacks like a duck, is a duck. So take, as I said, the search engine. I mean, if the search function is performed through an algorithm, it's clearly in scope. I mean, there's no doubt. I'm sure when we go to the finesse of it, there will be an army of legal experts that will argue all sorts of things about the fine distinction between one or the other. In any case, DMA can look at also other services, can look at tipping markets, can look at an expansion of the definition. So in any case, if necessary, we can go that way. But largely, when we see how AI, generative AI, is used in enhancing the offering of web services, such as, I mean, can you tell me what will be the weather tomorrow in, I don't know, in Washington? Frankly, it's a search function. Then it's in a very well-educated language or multiple language. So the difference between one and the other becomes very subtle. So I'm not saying that tomorrow we'll jump to the conclusion that those providing GenAI fall straight into the DMA, but clearly we are looking at all the similarities or the blending of those services, and the same applies for DSA.
Let's talk about the international environment, because of course Europe is here a pioneer in terms of having passed the first act, or having certainly worked on the first act. We know there is the executive order of the president in the US, but nothing like an actual piece of legislation. And you're engaged, of course, with multinational other institutions. For example, the US is not directly having a role in this, but it is observing, and it is also pushing to keep, for example, private companies out of some of the provisions. Where are we in this international discussion?
Well, it's a discussion that is taking place almost everywhere, to a point that you need AI to understand, how many groups and how many declarations, well, or some other, maybe a European
version.
So it does really so many declarations, so many self-commitments, so many letters about the end of the world that it starts to be complex, and it starts to be also interesting to see that there's a kind of also competition of governments or bodies, to say, look, we are doing something about it, which is in a way extremely good, because I think this is a defining technology. We are, let me use again, it's very much popular in the United States, at an inflection point. So I use also inflection point. We are entering the era of intelligent machines, so which is a completely different era. So I think all this attention is well placed. Also, when you see what happened to human beings when they started to understand nuclear power, what they can do with the nuclear power. So the attention, it's correct. And as you said, Europe is the one that is a bit more concrete, because by tradition we are better in balancing fundamental rights and other interests into a legislative act. We have done it for privacy, we are trying to do it for the web, the same for AI. But of course, Europe is not the world. So the United Nations, they have the Wise People Group that is working on a recommendation from the Secretary General, extremely good. That's the initiative from the UK, which led to the creation of this rotating conferences. The next one will be in France, and there will be a follow-up. We have an intense cooperation with the United States and see how to work together, also on setting the standards, because one of the things which is extremely complicated in this space is what is the benchmark? When you say a company does not comply or comply, to what? What is the standard? Right. So when it's about, for instance, a nuclear generation, there are standards. So you can measure, you can say, yes, you comply, you don't comply. Here, not clear. Same in aviation, there are standards. Here, it's not clear. What we know is that the algorithm cannot be defined. It's not very clear what is going to be the output. Can be, and indeed, it's still at time, I laugh. I asked one of those algorithms to translate the AI Act. They started to give me recommendation for hotels. It's a moving target. So it's important that the international community remains engaged. It's important that companies themselves show self-responsibility. So it's another balancing act, another managing expectation and doing things. And it will not be easy in a world that is also very complicated.
Yes. So, it's a question of time, because, of course, one needs to understand this technology even before one sort of seeks to understand how to regulate it in detail or implement a regulation. I wanted to ask you a final question on the DMA in particular. You are close, your team is very involved in the implementation, and not anticipating any of the, we'll discuss it with Filomena and Alberto, but not anticipating any of the issues that might arise. You also, in reality, you have, of course, a strong telecoms background, and one of the questions that I hear coming from some of the gatekeepers are, we would like a more explicit approach in which, in a sense, implementation, rather than leaving it to us to just comply to exactly not sure what, is possibly more prescriptive. At least we know what we are up against. Do you see that kind of more regulatory sort of approach emerging in the DMA implementation eventually, on access pricing, for example, to some networks or to some infrastructure?
Well, look, DMA is much more similar to telecom regulation than people think. one example, for instance, the interoperability requirement.
Exactly.
I mean, it's exactly the same you have in telecom. I mean, you are not prescriptive in telecom how you should be interoperable. There are standards that you can follow. It's exactly what is happening, by the way, by those that have to implement it. And it is based normally, take for instance the interconnection, the notion of reference offer. So the concerned party, the regulated party, makes an offer to the competitors. These are the technical conditions in which I will interconnect the other networks. And then becomes the joy of regulators to go around these 20,000 pages of technical conditions, and this is okay, this is not okay, and the competitors file all sorts of complaints. And this is exactly what is happening as we speak. Some of the companies have published the conditions, and we are flooded by all sorts of comments, rightly so, by other companies saying this is okay, this is not okay, and all of this. So the mechanics of telecom and the mechanics of DMA have a point in common, which is there's a limit by which the regulator can prescribe things, because things are ultra-technical and ultra-dependent on the type of offering and model of that particular company. So that's why that part can only be filled in by the company themselves and, of course, then exposed to market scrutiny.
Very good. I think we have gone over our time and we are a little late, so I would like to thank you for this. It's always a pleasure and it was illuminating. We will continue the discussion with, on AI with Daron and Eric online, and Rana, if she's in the room, is going to... but thank you. Join me in thanking
Thank you for inviting me. Thank you.